morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar, In-Gang Profiling in Southeast San Diego, Data and Stories from Community Members. My name is Chauncey Smith, and I'm an Associate Director at Catalyst California. Catalyst California is an organization that aims to advance racial and economic equity for low-income communities of color throughout California. And we do that through partnerships with community-based organizations, by conducting rigorous research, analyzing data, conducting public policy advocacy, and doing power building to strengthen networks in the movement throughout the state of California. And I'm joined today by partner, a good friend, Michelle Woodson from Pillars of the Community.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Michelle Woodson. I am the legal director for Pillars of the Community. Pillars of the Community is an organization based out of Southeast San Diego, a group of folks who advocate for communities who have been negatively impacted by law enforcement and the carceral and punishment system. Our advocacy work lies in our shared knowledge and experience from community members who work collectively to decrease the criminalization of our communities. And we do this through programs that specifically focus on community building, civic engagement, and policy work. As an organization based out of Southeast San Diego, one thing has been abundantly clear, that there has been harassment in our communities by the San Diego Police Department. And when we talk about this, we hear so many stories over and over again from different community members who have been harassed, who have been profiled, who have experienced some pretty traumatic experiences from the harassment and racism of our San Diego Police Department. Because of this, a lot of these stories are anecdotal. We know that they're true, but what we wanted to do was use data to back up and support these experiences, and shed light on what we know is happening in our communities. And so we are fortunate enough to have partnered with Catalyst California on this research to identify and validate the experiences of our community members. And so what we'll be doing today is exactly that, going through the report that we have created together in partnership with Catalyst California, from data on police stops in San Diego County, and more specifically in Southeast San Diego. We have an incredible agenda outlined for you all today, where we will go over this data, the methodology. Of course, we will also be hearing directly from community members who have been impacted by over-policing in Southeast San Diego.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Michelle. So in addition to hearing from Michelle and myself, you'll also be hearing from some very profound speakers, including one of my colleagues, Jennifer Zhang, who is a senior research and data analyst at Catalyst California.
And in addition to hearing from myself with Pillars of the Community, you will be hearing from our panelists, ICE, Cuban, Mimi, and Rasset, who are all directly connected to Pillars of the Community, but are also directly impacted by over-policing in our communities.
Next slide, please.
The agenda that we have laid out for you all today is to understand why we decided to create this report. We will identify some of the key data findings from the report and highlight some of those data points. We'll have a robust panel discussion to hear from community members that have been impacted by over-policing. And lastly, we will close out with solutions for what public safety truly looks like in our communities. And of course, we'll leave open some space for Q&A at the end.
So what is gang profiling? Well, I'll provide a brief overview to provide a grounding, a little bit of context for the rest of today's conversation, and to provide a foundation for the data that we want to get into a little bit more. But in general, there's three main things. One, there's the meaning. What does gang profiling mean? Second, it's also helpful to understand how it plays out in practice through everyday interactions between law enforcement and community members. And then third, gang profiling inflicts devastating harms, so it's important to have a basic understanding of what those harms might be. So to go back to the first point, gang profiling occurs when officers, in this case, officers from the San Diego Police Department, document community members who are often Black or Latinx in Southeast San Diego as gang members. And this often occurs during racially biased pretextual stops for relatively minor quality of life issues, such as someone driving around with a broken taillight, or perhaps they're jaywalking. And then once the person is stopped through these methods, they're often interrogated in a way that's very intrusive and functions as a form of harassment. And these interrogations are called field interviews, right? So the information that is gathered through the field interviews or interrogations is typically compiled onto what is called a field interview card. And then the field interview card is used to add very intrusive personal information about a person's identity, as well as their background, into an electronic database. And we typically refer to these databases as gang databases. And what research and lived experiences have shown is that the gang databases are often filled with inaccuracies in regards to who is a gang member and then the information about them. And then on top of that, the research shows that people from Southeast San Diego often don't know that they're being added to gang databases in the first place. And then third, to think about the harms, when someone is stopped during one of these interactions, it can be very traumatizing and function as a form of harassment and dehumanization for the individual having the engagement with law enforcement. But on top of that direct engagement, there's a whole host of ripple effects that also cause devastating consequences to a person. So for example, if a person is documented as a gang member, it can subject them to longer periods of incarceration if upon sentencing, a gang enhancement is applied. In addition to that, aside from sentencing, it can affect the whole pathway of a criminal case, from plea bargaining to charging decisions to influencing the perspectives of jurors in a case, so on and so forth. And then on top of that, for immigrant communities, being documented as a gang member can also increase the risk of deportation. Next slide, please. And I'll pass it back to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Chauncey. Before we get started, we do have a poll here that I wanted everybody to kind of engage in. I'm going to ask you all a question, and I want you all to answer in one word to kind of highlight some of our experiences. Can you answer this question about how do the police make you feel? I'll give folks 30 seconds to answer.
How do the police make me feel?
Yes. And if you could answer in the poll.
Paranoid, cautious, nervous. I don't want to steal all the words from the other people that are going to speak, because I know that they're all the same. So yeah, that's how I feel.
Thank you, ISB. Excellent. It looks like folks answered the poll. If we could go on to the slide, so we actually created a compilation video. We interviewed folks specifically in Southeast San Diego using this very question and asking community members how they feel around police. And if we could play the video, you can see the community members' responses to this question.
How do I feel when the police are behind me? Nervous.
Scared.
Afraid.
Fearful.
Scared. No matter how much we change for the better, they still view us as criminals or monsters or whatever, no matter how much we do for the community.
How do I feel when the police are behind me? Scared.
Uncertain.
Scared.
I just feel uncomfortable.
I feel scared.
Scared.
I feel kind of nervous.
Scared.
Just nervous. Scared sometimes. They look at you a certain way. They just think you're a criminal just by looking at you. You know what I mean?
Nervous.
Nervous.
So when we look at, is there any way that we can see the responses from the poll? If we can show that.
Juliana, are we able to show the poll results?
Yeah, 1 second.
I can talk while we're pulling up the poll results. So one thing that I found is that, when we hear about police and the intention of police, oftentimes what they say is that they are here for public safety. It's to make our community safer. But if you talk to community members who are living and experiencing communities that have been over policed, you will see that community members, no matter where they come from, often say that they do not feel safer when police are around. And in fact, what they feel is the exact opposite, right? And so some of what we are seeing here in this poll, people say that they've felt angry, terrified, nervous, unsafe, surveilled, that they feel anxious, right? It's very similar to the folks that we interviewed for our video. And I think that is very telling. And I think that also highlights the fact that policing in our communities doesn't actually work to create true public safety for the people that need it. And so when we talk about the use of police in our communities, when we talk about the way that they have harassed our communities, the way that they have profiled our communities, we also want to talk about what are real solutions, right? And so throughout this webinar, that's exactly what we want to highlight. We want to highlight and validate the experiences of our community members when they have been over policed, but also when they have been profiled as gang members, and how that impacts the safety in our communities. And we'll close out by talking about what does true public safety look like. I will toss it back to Chauncey and Jay-Z to talk a little bit more about the data that we found in doing this research.
Thanks, Michelle. So next, my colleague Jennifer Zhang and I will provide a high-level overview of the data analysis that we conducted in partnership with pillars of the community to produce the joint report. But at a high level, there were three key findings from what the data revealed. So one is that the data show that San Diego Police Department patrol activities largely target Black and Latinx people, and in some instances, other people of color in Southeast San Diego, and subject them to gang profiling. Second, the data also show that gang profiling undermines community safety rather than making people safer. And it does this by inflicting tremendous harms on Southeast San Diego community members, while also being an ineffective crime prevention method. And then third, these racially biased and harmful practices waste tremendous public dollars. These resources could be better invested in non-law enforcement safety programs that are rooted in care and equity. Next slide, please.
Awesome. So to talk a little bit about the actual data set that we used for all the research, right? So California now requires that police officers record data for each stop they make and then make that data public. And so that data set is what we call RIPA data. The fields that officers are required to fill in for each stop include a variety of things, but includes characteristics about who is being stopped, such as the officer's perception of that person's race, gender, or age, as well as information about the stop itself, right? So what was the reason for the stop? Where is the stop taking place? What is the result of the stop? But it's really important to note that, like any data, right, there are limitations. Any information an officer is documenting about people being stopped is based on their own perception. So any data about the race or gender or other aspects of someone who was stopped by a police officer is not always going to be accurate. And in fact, there is already a lot of literature about RIPA data in general that shows there are undercounts of certain BIPOC groups in these RIPA data sets because they're being miscategorized by police. So given that this RIPA data is based on officer perceptions, it cannot account for how community members experience a police encounter. And that's why it's so important, right, that we combine this data analysis with community stories to ground truth what it is that the RIPA data is showing. And that was a really important part of our project. Specifically, right, we were focusing on identifying gang profiling activity in the data for this project, but we found that the data on the gang enforcement assignment was under-inclusive. So this required us to use different measurements to identify gang enforcement activities. And so that's why for this project, we use that field interview card stop result that Chauncey described earlier as that additional measurement of gang enforcement activity. And finally, I just want to note that for our project, we are analyzing the RIPA data by San Diego Police Department or SDPD division. And so these SDPD divisions are just the collections of police beats that are grouped by geographical regions. So for instance, Southeast San Diego is a San Diego Police Department division. Next slide, please. Before going deeper into the data, I just want to acknowledge that, this data is kind of hard to hear. It's important, but it's also challenging to take in. So take a breath and just remember these aren't just numbers and stats. These are real people, right? These are the people we saw in that video that was just shared. These are our community members. So it's not something that's removed from us just because it's a statistic or a graph. So digging in to that first data finding, right? SDPD patrol activities target Black and Latinx people in Southeast San Diego and subjects them to gang profiling. On this slide, we can see a graph that's looking at all of the stops made by SDPD officers who were assigned to gang enforcement, and it's broken down by the perceived race of everyone they stopped. It's very clear off the bat, right, that people who officers perceived as Latinx or Black were disproportionately stopped compared to other groups. And in fact, 70% nearly of all stops made by officers assigned to the gang enforcement were of people perceived as Black or Latinx. And in addition to the percentage of stops, you'll notice there's these kind of different sized bubbles on the graph, and those represent the total number of people stopped, because that's also another way to understand the impact, right, of these stops. So for example, we see that 40% of people that were perceived by officers assigned to gang enforcement as Latinx were stopped, right? Or a total of 194 people. Next slide, please. On this slide, we focus on that different measurement for identifying gang enforcement activities, right? So here we're looking at stops made by any SDPD officer that resulted in a field interview card. Right? Again, we know from the literature and we know from community experiences that officers often use these field interview cards to document people that they are profiling as gang members. So from this graph, we see people perceived as Black are disproportionately stopped by any SDPD officer and given that field interview card. And in fact, Black people were subjected to these stops that resulted in a field interview at a rate 5 times greater than that of people perceived as white. And we also see on this graph that people who are perceived as Latinx have the 4th highest rate of stops that resulted in a field interview, but that total number of people is over 400,000. So that's a huge impact. Next slide. And finally, we are looking at that same data here. So we're looking at stops made by any SDPD officer that resulted in that field interview card by race, but now it's mapped out across those different SDPD divisions. So on this map, each dot represents 5 people that were stopped with a field interview card. And the different colors just represent the different perceived races of the person that was stopped. I think immediately, right, we can see that giant concentration of stops in Southeast San Diego. And that's across all perceived races. But even in this sort of screenshot view, we see that concentration of blue and green dots coming out, right? And those are folks who officers perceived as Black and Latinx. So essentially, right, what we're seeing from all this is that not only is there a high rate of these stops with field interview cards that are being given out to people of color, but there's a huge concentration of these stops occurring specifically in Southeast San Diego. Next slide. So moving on to our second finding, SDPD's racially biased gang profiling is not safe. And in fact, it undermines safety and harms the Southeast San Diego community where this behavior is disproportionately occurring. So one way to illustrate this via the data is to look at how often stops and searches made by SDPD actually result in contraband being found, because that gets at this idea of, are these stops and searches actually preventing crime or promoting safety? So specifically, this graph on the screen looks at, out of all stops where a search occurred during that field interview process, what percentage of those stops resulted in no contraband found at all? And immediately, right, from the graph, we can see across the board these high rates, right, for each BIPOC group where, you know, people are being stopped, given field interviews, searched, but yet no, the overwhelming majority of these have no contraband being found. And so diving a little bit deeper, officers subjected 1,705 people perceived as Latinx and 1,366 people perceived as Black to these unnecessary searches during field interviews in 2022 alone. And in Southeast San Diego, people perceived as Black and Latinx combined accounted for 89.8% of these unsuccessful searches during field interviews. Yet these groups together only make up 65.8% of the population in the Southeast San Diego division. So what this is telling us, right, is that an overwhelming majority of these stops where SDPD is harassing people with field interview cards and a search do not even result in any contraband being found, right? Which begs the question of why these stops and searches are happening at all. Next slide. And then again, we're looking at that same data, but mapped out across the SDPD divisions. So each dot represents 5 interview cards where a search was completed. And the purple dots represent where contraband was not found, and the orange dots represent where contraband was found. We see again in general that these searches done during field interview cards are disturbingly concentrated in Southeast San Diego, but also that an overwhelming number of those stops are that, you see that purple color come through, right? These stops are not resulting in contraband. And in fact, in Southeast San Diego, SDPD subjected 77.5% of people to these unnecessary searches where no contraband was found. Next slide, and I'll pass it back to Chauncey.
Thank you, Jay-Z. So as a brief recap, Jay-Z walked us through what the data show in terms of racial disparities and who was being stopped, right? And also geographic location of stops, which shows that there's higher concentrations of police activity related to gang suppression in Southeast San Diego. So a third way that we cut the data was to look at how officers are spending their time, right? Because I think, you know, there's a typical narrative out there which leads us to believe that officers are out there fighting crime and making communities safer. And the daily activities that they do. So we looked at the RIPA data based on the different types of stop results, right? So you can see at the bottom of this data visual, there's a legend which shows different types of stop results that could occur. So a stop could result in a field interview card, which is a proxy or indicator of gang profiling, like we talked about earlier. A stop could result in a warning. It could result in a citation for an infraction, which is something relatively low level, minor, that someone cannot even get jail time for. It could end in no action, and then so on and so forth. There's a litany of other results. And by analyzing the data on San Diego Police Department stops, what we saw is that the department is wasting a tremendous amount of time and public dollars on very low level activities that do not need to be policed. So here specifically, an analysis of hours spent by SDPD officers assigned to gang enforcement shows that nearly 1 out of every 5 of their patrol hours is spent on stops that result in a field interview card. And field interview cards, again, are indicators of gang profiling because those are the method used to add people into gang databases. However, if you add on to that and build upon not only stops resulting in a field interview card, but also looks at stops that result in a warning or citation, infraction, or no action, which are all very low level results and indicative of activities that are not really posing a risk to public safety, it shows that approximately 47.7% of officer time is spent on those very minor quality of life issues and things that really don't need to be policed. And in turn, that equates to public dollars being wasted on things that are not making communities safer. Next slide, please. So thinking about this from a big picture perspective, another thing that we did was take a look at the San Diego Police Department's budget in relationship to other departments across the city. And here you can see that this bar graph shows that on the far left, the San Diego Police Department by far receives the largest amount of dollars from the city of San Diego. And in fiscal year 2022, that amounted to $593.3 million. And that is by far much larger than the investments in other types of resources and investments that build long-term true community safety, such as the Department of Parks and Recreation, Transportation, Libraries, Environmental Services, and Economic Development. If you take those agencies' combined budgets, it only amounts to $358.4 million compared to the $593.3 million spent on San Diego Police Department. And then in addition to that, we took a closer look at how dollars were being spent within San Diego Police Department to identify how much was actually being spent on gang profiling in Southeast San Diego. And we found that approximately $43 million was being dedicated to those gang profiling operations. So having provided an overview of what the data show on the key issues, again, that the San Diego Police Department's practices are racially biased and that they're profiling communities of color in Southeast San Diego, that those practices undermine community safety, and that third, those practices waste tremendous public dollars. Next, we'll hear from Michele and some community members and organizers and pillars of the community to hear directly about their lived experiences with gang profiling in Southeast San Diego.
Thank you so much, Chauncey. First, I want to thank our incredible panelists. We have Ice-B, Cuban Mimi, and Rasset here to join us. And as Chauncey mentioned, after hearing the data, what we want to do is connect and hear directly from Southeast San Diego community members about their experiences with SDPD and specifically the Gang Enforcement Unit. So I appreciate you all for being vulnerable enough to share some of these experiences. Before we get started, I did want to ask one, as we get started, the first question I want to ask each of you, and we could go in the order in which you all were listed, is can you tell me about your first experience with law enforcement? I will have ICB answer the question first. We can't hear you. You're on mute.
No.
We can't hear you, ICB. You know what we could do? While you work on trying to get unmuted, we can toss it to Michael first, or Rasset.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. Now, now we've got ICB stepping back in.
My
Okay,
bad.
no
My
worries.
bad. I was maybe about 9 or 10. I don't know, whatever junior peewee is. I was playing football, and we were walking home from practice, and the police stopped us and asked us if they knew the older kids that was hanging up at the park. You know, and when you say older kids, they were probably 13 or 14. So that was my first interaction with the police. And I was just walking with a group, my neighbors, you know. So that was my first interaction. And I can remember, now that I'm older, how close that was to an interrogation. Like as a child. And I didn't even know what interrogation was then. So that was my first interaction.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that when we talk to our community members, and specifically in Southeast San Diego, what we hear very often is that their first interactions happened when they were a minor, which asks, which has us question, why are police stopping minors, right? And why are they assuming that these minors are gang members or that they are affiliated with gang members? And so I want to toss it to Cuban Mimi, if you could share a little bit about your first experience with law enforcement.
Okay. Well, the first experience. I'm gonna say 10 years ago. I'd rather use that one versus the one when I was a minor, because that one was just more of a protocol with the school. So the first, because this one was just more physical and brutal. So it was more based on me getting to a scene where my beloved husband was murdered. And when I got to the scene, reacting the way anybody would react with someone they've been with for so many years and have children with, of course, I'm going crazy and I'm wilding out, and I'm just trying to get, to identify if that's him. Police did not do protocol right. I was mishandled very wrong. I was hit in the nose with with his arm. Once I was out on the ground, very dizzy. I was basically, put handcuffs on. I was dragged across the pavement where my feet was just like my heels came off, because I had got the news while I was at work, and my scars, I have scars on my feet, and I was just dragged across the pavement. Then I was slammed onto the car, and then I chipped my tooth. Then I was thrown in a car without any type of AC on or anything. This was May 9, 2014. And then when I was pleading for help, like, please let me, I was asking questions. I was crying. I was begging because I couldn't breathe or anything like that in the back seat. The cop opened the door and he just called me names like, you effing, he didn't say B or anything, but he was just like cursing at me. And then long story short, it was just like, he didn't want to hear what I had to say. Later on, found out who I was, and I was arrested and I was booked. And even though I bailed myself out, and the chief sergeant, he dropped, he told him to release me or whatnot. It was already too late. I was already booked. So I had to deal with my background. I had to deal with everything because I had contact with police. So long story short, it was a very brutal situation to run into. And I don't think that if my skin was the color that it was, I don't think I would have been handled that way. I think they would have calmed me down And I think they would have asked me questions to figure out who I was and why was I acting that way, and why was I trying to justify my tears and all that stuff. And I just feel like they didn't go about it the right way. They just looked at me as another statistic. And you know, I got out of jail with 2 black eyes, bloody nose, and I also lost our unborn child. So I had a whole miscarriage. Probably like 2 weeks later, I was miscarriaging, but I didn't want to accept that. So sorry for the long thing, but yeah, that's police for you.
Thank you, Mimi, for sharing that personal story and being courageous enough to allow us into that space with you. I think what I want to highlight here out of your experience, it's one of the more brutal experiences that we've heard. And even in a time in which you were supposed to be grieving, in which you were a victim, that police still treated you as a community member in that way, right? And I think that this story is something that many of our community members have experienced, that even in times when police are supposed to show up to a scene and you know, be there for our community and be, you know, there for our public safety, they still discriminate against our community members and still brutalize us in ways that traumatize us far longer than that immediate interaction. Lastly, I want to toss it to Rasset. If you could answer, can you tell us a little bit about your first experience?
Definitely. I remember it like it was yesterday because it was so traumatic, and it ultimately changed my life in a negative way. I was about 11, and I was with like 3 of my friends. 11, you know, we're all 11. One's born a little earlier than a year, so he's 12. And we're headed to the park to play basketball. We got actually one of them plastic basketballs that ain't even a real basketball. That's how young we was. You know what I'm saying? And we got stopped by the San Diego Police Department's gang suppression unit. And I guess I fit 3 of their point criteria just based on these 3 simple facts. Number 1, I live in a reputed Crip neighborhood in Southeast San Diego. It's Crips over there. Number 2, I got a blue Chargers t-shirt on because I was a Charger fan. I'm still to this day a San Diego Charger fan. San Diego Chargers though. Don't get it twisted. And 3, I was the 12-year-old that I was with actually had got a field interview before, and he was documented as a neighborhood Crip. So those 3 points alone got me put into the Cal Gang database, which I didn't even know at the time. Fast forward a couple years, I ended up getting in trouble at 15, and based on the gang allegations, I got 2 years. They sent me to Arizona and Texas to do my time at 15. When I was one of those type of kids, my mom didn't even let me spend the night at people's houses. So the first time I ever been away from my mom, I'm in Arizona and Texas. Then when they finally released me at 17, my probation conditions, this is when I find out, my probation conditions prohibits me from walking to the corner store that's 7 houses down from my mom's house. It prohibits me from interacting with anybody I ever grew up with in my neighborhood. And if you get caught and get a gang enhancement violation on probation or parole, they'll give you the maximum amount of time that they can give you for violating that probation or parole. So that's when I found out when I was 17. But just think about it. What is a group of grown men, a gang suppression unit even doing, stopping a group of 11 and 12-year-olds? And not only stopping us, basically, when you think about it, it's a form of molestation because they make you put your hands on the car. They make you spread your legs as wide as you can spread them. And just because people have drugs and they catch people with drugs like under their, you know, private parts, they running their hands all up in, you know, it's a form of molestation. You're doing this to kids. It's sick. Like, so that was my first interaction, first of many, with the San Diego Police Department gang suppression unit.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Rasset. What I want to highlight and pull out of some of the things that Rasset mentioned, right, is that oftentimes when we hear the term gang member, it's directly associated with criminality, right? It's directly associated with crime. It's directly associated with negative connotations, right? But in the experiences that we've heard today from both ICE-B and RACIT, what we hear is that they were children, right? That we've already identified children that live in particular neighborhoods as gang members and also connect them to the idea of criminality, right? We've already created this idea that they are less than human. What I also want to highlight about what about what Rasset said is that how easy it was to be documented as a gang member, right? And in fact, at the times that both ICE-B and Rasset were documented as gang members, they were not required to notify even minors or their parents or anyone that was included in the CalGang database that they were being documented as gang members. And as Rasset mentioned, it was so easy, right? You have to wear a particular color, live in a particular neighborhood, associate with particular people who are on the CalGang database. And so much of the time, how can you help that, right? You live in communities, like, for example, if you live in San Diego, you wear a Chargers jersey. How can you help wearing a blue jersey in a particular neighborhood, in a neighborhood where your entire family grew up? How do you disassociate with that, right? And to couple that with, when you are identified as a gang member and inputted into the CalGang database, this doesn't just identify you as a gang member. It also has impacts, collateral impacts after the fact, right? So they use these this identification to add to particular sentences. So they can add a gang enhancement onto your sentence now, right? For people that had no idea they were on the CalGang database. If I could give one example before we get onto the next question. For instance, let's say somebody was charged with, and I'll give an example of a young man I was representing who was a minor, and he got in a fight in high school, which so many of us got into fights in high school. Got into a fight in high school. The underlying charge was a sentence of less than 2 years. But because he was a documented gang member, they included a gang enhancement onto his sentence, which added an additional 10 years onto a sentence. And this is what happens to our community members. We identify them as gang members so that we can lock them up for years and separate them from their family members. So if I could go on to the next question that I have for our panelists, and I'll start off with ICE-B again. How has these kinds of police interactions impacted you, the people that you love, and your community?
Well, it's impacted me greatly because I've had interactions with the police most of my life, from on the streets and in prison. And one thing that I've learned, like, we're talking about public safety. And the reality of it is that the police are a gang as well. And gang members are treated as such. So when they pull over and meet the criteria to do those cards, they're not talking to us like they're writing it in a report. They're calling him Rasset. They know his real name. So they address us and treat us as such gang members, but without any repercussions, because they're a part of all the gang stuff that's going on. That's the reality of it. The people that they're arresting and the people that are dying, that are being killed. The police have started many gang wars in San Diego. And I know that firsthand because my neighborhood was targeted specifically from interactions with the police. So I'm very familiar, and it's a very famous San Diego case. And that opened light into what the police were doing in San Diego and how gang documentation could help them solve a case that they couldn't solve legally. I mean, by the rights of the law. Because once they document you as a gang member, the normal rights that human beings are supposed to have can be violated and justified in court. Yes, we illegally searched him. Yes, we took something that we wasn't allowed to take, but he's in a gang. And it's just, and I've been around for generations of this, and I've watched them fear me more now that I'm educated about my rights and the law and how to treat me than I was when I was running the streets as a documented gang member. And I haven't had any interaction with the police for illegal reason in 18 years, and I'm still on gang file.
Thank you, Ice B. I want to uplift some of the things that you mentioned in your response, right? One is that being a gang member in and of itself is not a crime, right? But there are some negative implications and consequences that come with being identified as a gang member. And you mentioned something about who are considered gang members, right? So we have this kind of label of what a gang member, and it's all directly connected to these negative connotations, right? We actually, at Pillars of the Community, we did a Public Records Act request on exactly this of the people that have been incarcerated in San Diego, who have gang enhancements, what are their race, right? And we found that 98% of the people that have been incarcerated from San Diego with a gang enhancement were non-white, right? So we've identified gang members as specific races, right? That are only attributed typically to Black and brown communities. And what does that do, right? What we found throughout history is that it's easy to justify how you villainize a community if you labeled them as as criminals, right? And that's exactly what we are doing with what they are doing with these gang enhancements and identifying folks as gang members, right? We then, as ICB mentioned, we then justify how we can continue to harass people. We justify how we can incarcerate them for these insane lengths of sentences, right? We justify taking them from their families, taking them from their communities. And we justify all of the things that the carceral system does and the collateral consequences that come with being a documented gang member, but also with having a criminal record. So if I could toss it to Cuban Mimi to answer the same question about how has San Diego Police Department's interactions in your community, how have that impacted you, your loved ones, and your community members?
Up to the incident 10 years ago, back on May 9th, 2014, I would always just consider the police just being the police. I mean, I always knew there was discrimination, racism, and all things going on with the police department. I mean, just growing up under gang members and growing up in the gang related area, I already knew like, oh, there goes Spears. We got to run. We got to, we just knew how to dodge the situation. But up to that date in that situation, my eyes were like completely different. I mean, the way I just see the whole, like, it's kind of like if you see a car that you like and then you just start seeing that car everywhere you go. I can't believe, especially going back to that scene, when I was doing my investigation and figuring out, like, I'm not going to let this cop get away with what he did. And I'm also trying to figure out what happened to the father of my children. It all boils down to him being a gang member. It all boils down to him being gang related, but he's not gang banging. He's a businessman. So in the news and everywhere they were announcing, it was like gang member from West Coast Crips and this and that. And then later on falling down to a businessman, because that's how he passed away, being a businessman. But they operated that area as gangs. Like, hey, y'all, just let y'all know, this area, Oak Park, this is all gang members. This is bad. So we need to come in like military force, versus these are family that are hurting. These are people that are, they're going through something right now. And I just feel like that area alone is it's just the area itself. I feel like if this would have happened in La Jolla, or if it would have happened even in Mira Mesa or something like that, things would have been a little bit different than it happening in Oak Park. And mind you, Oak Park it wasn't even as bad as, it's not bad no more, but it's, it is what it is. I know, for example, my son driving by to go see his dad's mural, and the cop parks and they look at him and they're just watching him. And next thing you know, they follow him, get behind him, they violate him 100%, get him out the car. He already knows what to do. He knows to record. Situations like that. Like, what are we going to be expecting when we go in that area or when we go anywhere near Southeast? And that leads me to the next question, which I will answer when that time comes. But yeah, it's definitely a bad impact with San Diego Police Department and gangs or discrimination of gangs being Black, brown. They could look at me and not think that I'm a gang member, but automatically just think I'm into prostitution or something like that, just because I'm in that area with known gang members or know the area that there's gang members who we're trying to save. So yeah.
Thank you, Mimi. And I think what I want to highlight from Mimi's response here is that by identifying particular people as gang members, we also dehumanize them, right? That the SDPD dehumanizes their experience, but not just their experience, also the folks that are closely related to them, right? So their loved ones, their community members, and they justify their interactions with the community because they see that they have treated them and view them as less than human because of this identification. So if I could toss it to Rasset to answer this question about how does the SDPD harassment impacted your community?
Okay, it affects the whole community as a whole. It rips the man out of the home. It makes the woman raise the family on her own. Back in the 70s and stuff, you used to see cops rolling around and all the kids on their little badge stickers and stuff. Nowadays, Black and brown kids hate cops because they see what they did to their daddy. They see how they treated their mom when their mom was a victim. So it affects everyone in the community, not just gang members. It's tough because they're supposed to be there to help, but they're there to terrorize us. We did some data and we found out that like 86% of all stops in Southeast San Diego they initiated them. We're not even calling them for help, but they're over here just terrorizing us. It's traumatic. So all aspects of our community feel it.
Thank you, Rasset. And what Rasset was saying here is that trauma from those interactions are passed down to their other family members, right? So even if particular family members or your community members haven't had firsthand experience in interactions with law enforcement, these experiences from people that they know cause and inflict trauma into other community members, right? And so for my final question, I think what we've heard, what we've seen through the data, but what we've heard from our panelists here is that police do not make us feel safer, right? And in fact, their interactions in our communities and specifically in Southeast San Diego does the opposite, right? It makes us afraid. It actually harms us. They harass our community members, but they also inflict long-lasting trauma and harm, right? That changed the dynamic of our communities and our families. So my last question to you all, and I'll start with ISB, is if police are not keeping us safer, can you tell me and describe to me what does true public safety in your community look like?
I can't explain what it looks like, but I know it don't involve the police. I know it doesn't. Well, it doesn't make it better. It doesn't help it. And to be honest, speaking from a person who grew up in gang culture, the reason why young kids gravitate to gangs is because of the things we're talking about, the things they've seen the police do. And like Rasta said, you calling them gang members, but if we were any other neighborhood or in any other place, you will be calling them neighbors. Like that's his neighbor. Like I have friends from my neighborhood that I've known for 45 years. And I can't be around them. So to me, public safety is like what Rasset was talking about when we were little kids. Like the police used to come to our school and give out those stickers that you were talking about and register your bicycle and do all of that. Now like I said, they're just like another gang. So, and they're really only making the situation worse as far as public safety is concerned, because they're going to other neighborhoods when crimes are being committed and then questioning them about the suspect. So now they have information on a crime that was committed, and that's how gang activity is created, through that and informants and all of that. Like, I don't understand how that helps. And if their job is to help, then we should bring something that's better than that. And I believe in the smallest scale that you guys showed, I believe that economics is the answer. If you give these children something to do and you put them in a place where they can better themselves, their community will get better. And then once the community gets better, the crime will go away. Once the crime goes away, then we can start policing ourselves, because in certain neighborhoods, they don't even have police that regularly stop unless they're getting coffee or something. There's no police posted up at the Jack in the Box in La Jolla. So I believe that true public safety can come from the public, like us, the people. And if you're going to spend all that money on stopping it, why wouldn't you spend it on the kids you're trying to get to stop it?
I love that response. You know, one thing I want to highlight is that, you know, what you shared, but also what we've heard from a lot of folks that have been documented as gang members, is that being a gang member is about camaraderie, right? It's about community. It's about people that you grew up with, that you associate with, that you have shared your life experiences with, right? So flipping the idea of what it means to be a gang member on its head, right? So I love that. And second of all, you know, if we look at research and data, it shows that communities that have high crime rates, it's directly related to poverty and those communities being under-resourced, right? So the solutions that you've identified about pulling, you know, funding from police departments and investing into those very same communities is what actually works. So I'll toss it to Cube and Mimi to, again, respond to this answer, to this question. If police are not making our community safer, what does public safety in your community look like?
Public safety in my community looks like us community members, leaders, people, period, just holding the police accountable, but like also stepping up and coming together. For example, like right now what the pillars have with the program with police accountability and putting in complaints. Cop pulls you over, you know, don't just look the other way. You know what I mean? We need to have a data system where we can inform, like let them know we're not playing anymore. The more fear we show them, the more they're going to keep doing. And then it goes from generation to generation. So now this cop's son became a cop. Now he's going to do what his dad did. And it's a generation thing that just continues going from their kids to our kids, because it's just a trend. I also feel like more resources and programs within the community. I don't want to have to travel way to Claremont or way to Mira Mesa or La Mesa. Not La Mesa, La Jolla, outside of my jurisdiction, what I'm used to, where I grew up at, just to get the services that I can get right here. Because in the midst of me going there, I'm going to get discriminated, or I'm going to get pulled over, or I'm not going to go because of the fear of getting discriminated or being pulled over. So I feel like a lot of good programs and resources in the community is dope. And I think it'll be, to me, that's just more policing ourselves. But most importantly, holding the police accountable, so that when they are in our communities, they think twice before pulling us over, because they know, okay, I'm going to pull Cube and Mimi over, but she going to have 10 people reporting it up, you know, on me. So I just think that letting them know we're not playing anymore. For another prime example, as I was saying before, in the area where I lost the father of my children, we hold a annual softball game there, and the police, in the first 3 years, they were harassing us. Now it's to the point where they got to come in, look, and keep going. We police ourselves. We're already Panther style, whatever style you want. That's what I'm talking about. If we do within our community, start like not policing ourselves, but policing ourselves, but holding the police accountable for the actions that they're doing, because there's so many minors being pulled over or being violated. There's so many women being violated, and sadly is our men are being also discriminated. They can just pull you over and just not even pull you. You could just be walking down the street. And the reason being is because they, you cooperate because you're thinking you're going to get shot or you're going to get a knee pulled on your neck and nobody's going to save you. Everybody's just going to record you while you die slowly. So yeah, we need to start holding the police accountable. That's my thing. So yeah.
That's a really good point, Mimi, and I want to highlight what you're saying about police accountability, right? Oftentimes our communities, and specifically here in Southeast San Diego, they're over-policed, right? And we are so used to being stopped, and we identify a good stop as not being arrested or not being physically harmed, right? But this doesn't happen in La Jolla or Del Mar, and why is that? Because police know that if it were to happen in those different communities, people would file complaints, right? So it's really important that when this happens in our communities, like this is not okay, right? And we should be holding those police officers accountable, right? And one way to do that is by filing complaints, right? Just like they harass our community members and our communities and put us on paperwork, right? So now we've criminalized people, and now it's easy to justify how we can lock them away for longer amounts of time, right? That's what we want to do, is start to track, these officers, these bad officers that are harassing our community members or violating our rights. And by filing these complaints, you're creating a paper trail on those bad officers, right? That can then be used to later on down the line, right? Where we can pull their record and say, it's not just my word against yours. I can also pull up and see that 10 other community members have said the same thing about this officer, so that we can prove that this officer has a propensity to be violent, has a propensity to be racially discriminatory, right? And that's the way that we fight against and hold police accountable when they are doing when they're doing wrong in our community and not making our community safer, right? And it also prevents those officers from, like Mimi said, from getting raises, right? From getting promotions, right? Those kinds of officers should not be moving up in the ranks, and instead should be held accountable for their actions in our community. I'll toss it to Rasset for the final answer on if you could tell me if the police are not making you feel safer in your community, what does true public safety look like to you?
Just to piggyback off what you and Mimi said, we definitely got to fight back, hold the police accountable. I'm actually head of the police accountability unit here at Pillars, to where we teach our community members to fight back and lead these paper trails and collect this data. But I think we got to dig a little bit deeper into the systematic reason why a lot of these youths are doing the things that they're doing. Because even if our society gets rich, people are still going to be from their community. They're still going to be from Lincoln Park. They're still going to be from neighborhood. That's never going to stop. So we have to, there's always going to be gang members. Being a gang member doesn't make you a bad person. Some of the best people I've ever met in my life were gang members. But the crime, we have to figure out what's starting it and nip at that problem.
You're cutting out here a bit, Rasset.
Maybe try going off camera. That might help a little bit.
Yeah, Rasset, do you want to try getting off camera? Okay. I think that we can, I think he's having some connection issues, but what we've heard here, right, are that the community members have the solutions, right? And the data and research back what each of our panelists have said today, that public safety lies in investing into our communities and investing into programs that are proven to work, right? And that includes providing places for youth to go, right? That includes investing in mental health support, in workforce development, investing in housing availability for our community members, right? And so when we're thinking of true public safety, right, this is not just anecdotal. This is not this is actually research backed, right? And I think what all our panelists have shared today is that if police are not making us feel safer, we should also not be investing so much into those police budgets and in fact into those programs and departments that create true public safety. So thank you all. I want to thank our incredible panelists for being both courageous and vulnerable and sharing so much of their experiences, because what I think that is incredible about this report is that it puts the data to human experience, right? It humanizes everything that we've known that our community members have been experiencing, but it backs it up and supports it with the data from that we've created through this report. So now I will toss it to Michael to talk about solutions.
I apologize. I was
That's
having
all right.
IT problems.
That's all right. Michael, what we're going to do is pull up the slide for the
Yeah, can you
solution.
pull up the slide, please?
And so we have solutions and recommendations that have come out from this report, and we'll have Rasset go over those recommendations.
Okay, thank you. First off, I just want to say thank you to Catalyst California, because in our community, we knew all this stuff was going on for so long, but we never could prove it. You know, San Diego Police Department had the thing saying that they were the friendliest police department in America, and people from my community noticed that's not true. So thank you for compiling all this data for us. We love it, and we knew all along what was going on. Okay, number one, we need to reinvest dollars wasted in profiling and equity-centered safety programs. Number two, enact the PROTECT Act. Number three, acknowledge harms caused by gang profiling and apologize to Southeast San Diego community members and mean it. Number four, remove all gang units from Southeast San Diego because they don't do nothing. And just to go back off what Michele was saying earlier, we actually did find maybe 2 or 3 white people in the Cal gang that got gang enhancements. All of them was from either an Hispanic or a Black gang. So let that sink in. Number 5, enhance SDPD accountability. Number 6, increase SDPD transparency. And number 7, decriminalize non-safety related quality of life issues. Can I get the next slide, please? I think we're going to questions, and I will flip it back to my mans in them.
Thank you, Rasset. Thank you, Michele, and to everyone for sharing your stories. Rasset, the recommendations that you walked us through are very comprehensive, and the city of San Diego should be moving in a direction in order to address a lot of the problems that were shown by the data and your stories and the lived experiences of other community members from Southeast San Diego. But next, we'd like to just create space for attendees to engage with us in this very important topic. So we just like to create space for questions and answers. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a panel, and you should see a box slightly to the right-hand side that says Q&A. If you click on that, it should give you an opportunity to pose a question. I will receive the questions that are compiled via the Q&A feature in the Zoom, and I will direct the questions to whoever the most appropriate person is, or one of the panelists or speakers that have already presented. So it could be Michele, Jay-Z, Rasset, so on and so forth. So please feel free to take a moment to think about something that is top of mind for you based on what the data show, based on the policy research, based on the stories and experiences from Pillars members, and offer up whatever is coming to mind, and we'll go ahead and respond accordingly. So we'll take a couple minutes for that. No questions so far. Don't be shy, folks. I know y'all are interested and engaged. Anything? Okay, here we go. We have one from Layla. Great to see you joining us, Layla. So Layla offers up, if we accept that police will protect themselves by unfounded complaints and or justifying the officer's action, why is it important to file complaints to ever stop? So I think the essence of this, if officers are going to essentially make complaints go away, right, through whatever nefarious measures that they have, such as, limiting the time of investigations or essentially trying to silence people that come forward to complain, why is it important to make the complaints in the first place? So for that, I will offer up space for Rasset. Please feel free to hop in.
Yeah, I answer that since that's kind of my specialty. It's very important to still file them. In our community, we have some community members that don't even want to file complaints on police because they think that it's a form like snitching on the police. We have other community members that think that they don't want to do nothing because it'll make the police hotter on them. Both of them are ridiculous. We need to file these complaints. They're important to our community because even if they come back unfounded, even if they come back and, we got a video and we still need the data. We have to collect the data. In this day and age, everything is about data. In 5 years, we'll be able to run all the police complaints in Southeast San Diego against Black and brown and indigenous people and see how many of them came back in our favor. So we still need it for the data. And it makes our community members feel empowered to fight back. In my experience with filing complaints, because I walk it like I talk it. The first time I actually got pulled over as an adult and I wasn't on parole, I wasn't a fourth waiver, I can't wait for the police to pull me over. I can't wait to exercise my rights. No, you ain't searching my car. No, you know what I mean? And I still got pulled out of my car illegally on the freeway, in the middle of the freeway, not the shoulder, the shoulder in the middle. Cars whizzing past us at 100 miles an hour. And from that encounter, I actually got a lawsuit against the San Diego Police Department and sued them and got a little bit, because I got a couple dollars. It wasn't, I didn't get rich. I couldn't quit my day job. But it at least acknowledged that they were wrong. And in my experience with me filing complaints and helping my community file complaints, the police see me because I got kind of a flashy car. They'll see me bust a U-turn because they could be going the total opposite direction, run my plates and bust another U-turn and get on. They don't mess with me like that. So I think they feel like it's not worth it if people are fighting back. So we still need to file them. We still need to give them a headache and we still need to be in their face.
Can I add to what Rasset just said, Chauncey, very quickly, right? So what he's saying is that it's still important to file these complaints. I mentioned a little bit earlier that oftentimes our community members identify a good stop as one that you walk away from without a ticket, without getting locked up or without getting physically harmed, right? But these police stops, as we've seen in this Catalyst report, is that they're wasting our time, right? That oftentimes when they even stop us, nothing is found from it, right? So I think it's important to even document that so that we have the data to say, y'all are stopping us and not finding anything is a tremendous waste of public dollars, right? That could be invested into something else, that could be invested in more specifically into things that are proven to create true public safety, right? And by filing these complaints for every interaction that we have with the SDPD, we are creating data on what those stops look like. And for those that don't feel comfortable filing those complaints, we do that here at Pillars of the Community. So I'm going to have Michael Rasset drop his email in the chat so that if anyone doesn't feel comfortable filing those complaints or doesn't know how or doesn't know where to start, that's something that we can help you with at Pillars of the Community. So we can help people do exactly that, and we can file them on your behalf. We can train community members on how to file these complaints.
And real quick, Michele, we also have a cop stop app. Like Michele was saying, we want to document every stop, even if the cop is the most courteous, helps you fix your flat tire, all that. So we still want to know about it.
Thank you, Rasted. Thank you, Michele. So we have some other feedback. Folks said that they were very receptive to hearing about the different community safety programs that Pillars is developing and implementing to counter a lot of the harmful law enforcement presence. Some other folks have posed another question. So, for example, from Ed Little, one of the things that he's interested in is about any work that Pillars is doing to offset the use of gang databases and FI cards as processes for facilitating people of color in Southeast San Diego being profiled as gang members. So is there anything, Michele, Rasset, others that Pillars is doing in relationship to trying to make the gang databases go away?
So we have participated in work to eliminate specifically the Cal Gang database, but each police department and specifically the like San Diego Police Department, they have their own kind of internal data that documents people as gang members. So even when the Cal Gang database was shut down and now they are required to tell people that they are being inputted into the Cal Gang database, specific police departments can still use their internal information, right? But this is something that we continue to fighting against including people into this Cal Gang database, but also fighting against gang enhancements and adding those onto people's sentences. So yes, it's something that we continue to do.
Right. And another question that came up is about constitutional rights. Is Pillars doing any work to help people on that front understand their rights, what the police can and cannot do in relationship to them, and what they can do as individual community members in order to express themselves?
That's a really good question. So yes, we do. So as part of our police accountability program, it's actually two-part. The first part is knowing your rights, your constitutional rights when you are interacting with law enforcement. And that second part of police accountability is filing those complaints, right? And the true police accountability. So I have dropped my email into the chat because we do, Rasset and I work in the police accountability department. So we can provide trainings and know your rights presentations to your communities and to your folks. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to email either myself or Rasset, and we'd be happy to coordinate with you to set that up.
Thank you, Michele, for responding to that question. So next, we will go ahead and pivot to the next section of today's agenda. And Juliana, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the slides one more time for us, we'll start to talk about next steps and call to action.
So what now, right? So oftentimes when we get these reports, people ask, what can we do to help? And there are a number of things that you can do. So one is, I think Chauncey is going to drop the full report in the chat for everybody to have so that you can fully review that and use in your work demanding accountability against police. The second thing is we've created a fact sheet, kind of like a quick one-pager on the information from this discussion today, from this webinar, and more specifically to consolidate some of the key findings that we found in the report and also the recommendations. And we also have an opportunity for y'all to step in to talk about why investing in our community is important, right? So here in San Diego, we're nearing a new fiscal year. So that means it's budget season. And so at our next San Diego City Council meeting, we'll be discussing the budget. on June 7th at 5 p.m. So you can either join online by submitting a public comment online, you can watch online, or you can join in person. What we want to talk about here about the budget issues is because recently we have found that millions of dollars have been pulled from race and from the Department of Race and Equity for the very programs that have been proven to create true public safety. So we talked a little bit here about the budget, right? And the disproportionality of the budget in funding the San Diego Police Department versus the departments that we know create true public safety. And so if you all are able to join us in our call to action to talk about the unfairness in the city's budget and pulling these resources and divesting from specifically Black and Brown communities and specifically from communities like Southeast San Diego that are under-resourced and underinvested in, we would love to have you all there in camaraderie and support so that we can voice our opinion and collective action in why it is important to invest into our communities. So we hope to see you all there.
Thanks, Michelle. And to wrap up today's event, we just like to thank everyone for coming. Again, to uplift the key points in our joint partnership together. It's one, San Diego's police department's patrol activities are racially biased, and they're targeting community members in Southeast San Diego as gang members. Two, these practices are extremely harmful. They harm community members in Southeast San Diego, and they undermine community safety rather than making streets safer. And then third, this wastes tremendous public dollars. Annually, the San Diego Police Department gets around $600 million from the city of San Diego. And amongst that, over 40 million goes towards gang profiling and for practices that should not actually be funded. So as a main takeaway, we want everyone here to know that, and then support pillars, read the report, take a look at the fact sheet, and please feel free to stay engaged by reaching out to us at our websites or our email addresses listed on the screen. Michelle?
Thank you so much, Chauncey. I just want to thank everybody for being here today and reading and hearing more about this report. I hope that you take the opportunity to read through the full report because there is really important data there that can be used in so much of our work in advancing true public safety. And of course, we have our contact information here. So if there's any way that we can help to support your work in this, or that you want to partner and we can provide some additional resources to you, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you, everyone.